to another episode of X Factor. I know I always say I'm excited, but today particularly so because I've got old friend and highly accomplished CEO Bob Craycraft joining us today to talk about governance alignment between management and private equity firms. So Bob, thank you so much for being a guest today.
Great. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, good deal. I had to ask Bob back because he was on a panel that is still to this day our most watched piece of content around this topic, but we're going to get a little bit more specific today around governance alignment. And we're going to talk through what that looks like during the courtship phase or interviewing and how both sides can sort that out. And then after those rings go on the finger, once you're hired, how the marriage kind of unfolds or doesn't, and what management can do there. So everybody, Bob is as credentialed as it gets. He's a four-time CEO with multiple exits, multiple private equity-backed wins. Today, he's CEO of Cadence Petroleum. But Bob, tell us a little bit more about your background, and then we'll dive in.
Sure. Yeah. And what's interesting about my career is I spent 19 years with the publicly traded company, Ashland, and worked for two of their divisions. And my last division there was running Ashland Chemical, which was about a $4 billion global chemical distribution business. We sold that to TPG. And then really the last, 15 years of my career have been dealing with private equity backed distribution businesses. And so whether it's been environmental services, specialty rental, telecommunications, and now I'm doing last mile distribution for finished lubricants and fuels. So it's been an interesting time of coming from a public domain into the private equity world, and being successful on both ends of it has, I've got a lot of battle scars and a lot of time in the chair here figuring a lot of things out. So, I'm excited today to have this conversation and hopefully give some nuggets of, experiences that will help them avoid a few of those battle scars.
Yeah, no doubt. So I came up with this parable that was partially inspired by you. So I think the right kind of PE athlete is a wolf pup who unknowingly was raised by humans and canines, which is the publicly traded company, and they learned all the skills and the behaviors. But then one day they were getting a drink of water in the pond, saw their own reflection and said, wait a minute, I'm a wolf. And they leave the domesticated world of the public company and they bound off into the wilderness of private equity, taking with them the skills and tools that they learn that make sense, but marrying that up with the heart, the instinct, the drive, and the execution, and the kind of the animal instinct, if you will, of PE-backed leadership. So anyway, I think that's what you are. You're okay with being a wolf, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Good deal. So as everybody knows, private equity harps a lot, and rightfully so, on alignment. And it does a good job with a lot of stuff. Like incentives are generally aligned on, equity in particular based on the MIP grant that executives are given. And when the exit goes well, private equity makes money, management makes money. But when you drill into alignment from there, there are varying levels of consistency on how that alignment unfolds. And one of the topics we're going to get into today is this governance alignment. And it's timely because for all of our listeners out there, if you haven't already filled out the CXO top 50 private equity firms for executives, do so, because we're trying to get your read on who's good at what we're about to talk about, which is the idea that as a search firm, Falcon doesn't care if our client has one governance model or another. What we care about is, do they know who they are? Is that model consistent across all deal teams versus a collection of fiefdoms? And then do they take that knowledge and consistency and use it to hire CEOs who are good puzzle pieces with who they really are? But what I just described is generally the exception as opposed to the rule. So we want to help be part of the solution there. So Bob, when you're going through the courtship phase and you're meeting a new private equity firm during interviews, just set the stage for everybody. Like, what's the dynamic? How are people behaving? How careful is everything? How much transparency is really unfolding? What's it feel like to go through that process?
Yeah, I think it is a very interesting process because it evolves. right? Is, you first get introduced to that PE firm for the first time, and whether you're coming in via recruiters introducing you to them, or you're going through a sales process and you're talking to a new prospective owner of the business that you may be working with down the road. That whole interview process, if you will, of establishing yourself. And the first thing you want to go through is say, okay, hey, I want to establish my credibility, right? So hey, I am a person who has the skills, has the capabilities to do this job, and really the IQ side of it, right? You have the intellectual capacity to continue to to come in, and whatever the situation is, whether you're helping them buy a company, whether you're helping them improve a company, from the old CEO or whoever may be taking over. But really that first phase for yourself is establishing credibility, with the PE firm. And I think the thing where I've probably made mistakes before, and I know I definitely did it when I was first becoming a private equity CEO, is understanding how they were going to establish credibility with me. Because a lot of times when you're interviewing for the CEO job or a role, you get excited and you say, hey, this is a $2 billion in revenue and it's $100 million in EBITDA. And, you get excited about the role and you're like, okay, well, hey, this business got there. So, the company opportunities there, but then, picking the shareholder becomes so important. So as you're interviewing and doing those things and you feel like, okay, hey, I've established myself as a viable candidate, somebody that can actually do this business. The important piece is you've got to turn that table, because most private equity firms during the process are going to give you the high line, headlines of what they're about. And, I think the one thing that I've learned going into any interview process to get a job is that, they're always going to ask about what your plan is. And I have a very detailed 100-day plan that I lay out for the private equity folks when I go to work for, or, as we're in the courtship phase, to say, hey, here's what you can expect from me in the first 100 days. And then here's how that's going to carry on all the way to exit. I think where you've got to do a good job as a CEO is ask them for kind of what the first 100 days looks like with them, and understand really if they say, hey, we've got a great OpEx program, we got this slate of operating partners that are available to you. You got to really dig in and understand what does that mean. And I think a couple of the critical factors are, one is you got to understand, do they have a push-pull mentality, right? Are they going to push those OpEx guys on top of you, or are you able to pull them down if you need them? And man, that dynamic is so important to understand in the CEO role, because for somebody like myself who has been successful with exits, been successful in building platforms, I am not a person who likes to have the push. I'm a person who likes to say, oh man, if there's resources available, I can pull them in. But I am not going to be successful in my role if I'm getting the push down. And so, I'm more of understanding the PE's philosophy around, hey, they like to hire great athletes. They like to hire people that can run the business and trust the leadership team. Let's get aligned on what success looks like and understand what the theories are behind how the business was, why it was bought, and then what we're trying to grow to. And man, we're going to keep you up to date on that. And if we need help, we'll ask for it. But there's a lot of PE firms out there that do have their skill sets that they feel like they have. They want to add value to it, and they got people eager to do that. And so understanding what the first 100 days is going to be from you, and understanding what the first 100 days is going to be from them, I think that discussion will actually give you a lot of insight into what you're getting into as a CEO, and whether or not you can really be successful or not.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, let's be clear. Bob's a four-time CEO. He's got a fully baked playbook and toolkit. He can occupy the seat fully. So if you're a first-time CEO, on the other hand, you may want to partner with a push firm who can help hedge your bets and make sure you can get to that very valuable exit, because you may not have that fully baked toolkit. But having that conversation is key. And I want to go back, Bob, something that you said about establishing credibility. And I agree with you that You got to get that done so that then they start to see you as more attractive, and then they want to open themselves up a little bit more. It's like, wow, Bob's credible. We'd like to work with him. He's asking some great diligence questions. I think candidates should not at all be afraid to dig in there. I think people get so caught up in ambitiously chasing the role. Either they forget to do it or they're afraid to give offense. But I'm giving them green lights on that regard. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I think that was the point I was saying earlier around, man, you get wrapped around the axle in a hurry around, man, big company, big opportunity, you like the space. But, give you an example. One time it was in between gigs looking at new opportunities. And man, this company had a nice size, nice scale. The market was really there for a lot of roll up. And so it was pretty clear to me, man, this market opportunity is real. But the company that the PE firm had bought, the kind of the platform company, had gone through a little bit of a downturn because this wasn't at the time of acquisition. This was a couple of years post acquisition. So the company had gone through a little bit of a downturn, and their leverage ratio was way out of whack. I mean, they were
Yeah,
almost 8 times levered. And
that's
so
high.
I immediately, I again in that early courtship, everybody's, oh, here's what we're doing, and I'm telling them, hey, I understand pricing and I understand operational efficiencies and getting those things done. And so I was getting really excited about this opportunity. And then we get to the question around, hey, what's the balance sheet look like? And I started doing the math, going, okay, between the capex, the interest payment on this
Mhm.
baby, this thing can't be close to cash flowing. And so I just turned around and said, hey, what is the free cash flow of this business look like? And quite frankly, I ended up getting out of I got out of the process because there wasn't a good answer to that. I mean, I knew from understanding these dynamics that they had to put more equity into the business. The balance sheet had to be redone, the debt had to be redone. And, just inherently, private equity firms don't like to do that unless they absolutely have to. And so, again, that was one of those questions that a lot of people get uncomfortable asking, and then really diving in, because a lot of people will just say, well, they're private equity guys, they're financial guys. That's the part they understand the best. But it doesn't mean it's a great situation, especially when you're coming into a situation where they've already owned the business. You can't be afraid to do that, because you got to protect yourself, because the second you're into the chair, that problem is your problem on
That
steroids.
problem is your problem, and now it's a career problem
Oh,
because
absolutely.
if you don't get to exit, and people rarely walk away, they're usually terminated,
Right.
and it's not fair, but now you're seen by most as damaged goods, and you'll get another at bat, but it'll be at a lesser opportunity, kind of triple A ball, where you can kind of prove yourself before you work your way back up. I think all the time that too many of these interview processes are both sides trying to play the role of interviewer and candidate, trying to be the ambitious person working for an offer. We try to set it up to where let's have both sides help each other become informed buyers of the partnership, even if that process causes one side or the other to beg off,
Right.
because that's far more productive of an outcome than not. And I think one of the ironies of your approach on the good side is you've built the credibility as a candidate. Now you're digging in on your diligence. If the answers to those questions bear out and you end up in the seat, now that private equity firm has even that much more confidence in you day one, because they know that you're a professional and that you think about the business in the way they hoped you would. I always tell my candidates that don't be too much of a pain in the butt, but the best candidates are a little bit difficult, especially when we're talking diligence.
No, absolutely. And I think you bring up an interesting point here, which is, you know, every again, I'm this way, right? I mean, if somebody approaches me about an opportunity, and and it's time to do something, if I'm in between opportunities, because unfortunately I seem to sell to strategics mostly, so
Mhm.
I'm easily kind of the first redundancy. Is I'm a competitor, right? And if somebody comes up with an opportunity, and it's a nice opportunity, I want to win, right? So I've had to really teach myself is that it's a little bit of the, Michael Jordan type of approach is like, hey, you hit a lot of game winning shots, but he missed a lot of shots too, right? And so every opportunity is not the right fit for you. And just because it seems like it makes a lot of sense on paper. And so being, knowing that you don't have to win, you know, you don't want to win the opportunity because you showed the best. You want to win the opportunity because you understand that whole situation to the best you can, that you've broken down enough of this business. And, you know, and I got myself into a tough opportunity one time because I took it for probably the wrong reasons and didn't, and I'd asked a lot of questions. And again, even with my background of asking some deep questions, I didn't, and they answered them all, but I didn't ask the perfect question, right? And nobody can ever do that without really
Hmm.
getting into the business. And after the first 90 days of diagnosis, I went to these guys and said, you overpaid for this business, man. And here's the 3 or 4 reasons why
Yeah.
you overpaid. And again, and not that you can ever get there, but getting as deep as you can comfortably is so important.
Yeah, no doubt. So we could do a whole separate episode on diligencing opportunities, but at a high level, from a like a field guide standpoint, it sounds like some great questions to ask around leverage ratio. What is your operating model? How do you envision, for me, your CEO or management team member, my first 100 days going from your point of view? Do you have a push versus pull approach to the resources that you do offer? And then, I'm curious about this topic because when I hear people really happy with their private equity partnerships versus frustrated, a lot of it has to do with the day to day and the amount of inbound inquiries
Yeah.
that either add value or distract. And I wonder how can folks get at that piece of the conversation, if that's even possible.
Yeah, well, I think that is actually probably one of the toughest pieces. And here's how I get at the conversation with that. One, I don't have it with the PE company. I always ask for 3 references, or I always want a current CEO, a former CEO, and then, hey, pick a third one. But, I want a current, a former, and then at least one more. And, and if a PE firm won't give you those 3 references to talk to those three CEOs, one, be careful. But two is, what I've always found is talking to the guy who's really the former CEO, who's been through a turn, who's out of the business, is not connected.
Hmm.
He or she will give you the most insight to really how that part of it goes. And I think that's where you really dig in there and understand their operating rhythm, because they're private equity. You want to be informed. There's always going to be a cadence, if you will, to their interaction. You just got to understand what that is, and then how they managed it, and their perception or realization of that. So that's where I've really been successful in finding out, who's who. That was my first mistake, right? When the
Hmm.
first private equity thing, a group I worked for, I didn't ask for that. And boy, I learned my lesson in a hurry around why that would be so valuable. And I've always done that since.
Yeah, and I don't think they're going out of their way to be dishonest. They're used to being a little close to the vest in everything they do, whether it's transacting a business between counterparties or something else. And, I'm just thinking of this real time. But let's say you're going through a CEO process. How many hours in total have they spent diligencing you face to face through interactions?
Yeah, and it depends, but it's multiple rounds of interviews, right?
Hmm.
They've dug in, they now with LinkedIn and all the connectivity people have, right? They've invested time in doing research on you from your former, people you work with, people you invest with. So, personally, you're spending, I don't know, at least 8 to 10 hours just face to face time with these guys.
Hmm.
Could be longer, depend, some firms I've spent more time with, more in depth with, they want to go through the whole gamut
Yep.
on the size of organization. So, I mean, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's still, you know, minuscule in the amount of time that you spend with them after the courtship, if you will.
Yeah, no doubt. In my experience, it's somewhere between 8 and 20 hours,
Yeah.
and the reason it might go toward 20 is if they use one of these third-party
Oh
assessments,
yeah.
does
Oh,
a 4 or 5 hour kind of proctological deep dive.
yeah.
So I guess where I'm getting at is, okay, if they are investing 8 to 20 hours in diligencing you, if you haven't at least invested that much
Yeah.
in diligencing the business, of course, but also them,
Yeah.
because that's the focus of today's conversation. Yeah, you got to make sure it's a good asset, but no matter how good or bad the asset is, if you can't get into sync with that new governance model,
Yeah.
it's just not going to go well for either party, which is terrible.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So we're talking about the courtship, how you go through it, some things to keep in mind. Okay, it culminates. You're in the seat now. You've talked through your 100-day plan. What are you paying attention to around you as that first 100-day unfolds?
Well, I think in the first 100-day piece of it is, my process is really what I call the listening tour, right? And that's both internal and external to the business. And I think it's important that as a new CEO in the chair, you got to really say to the PE firm is like, hey, I need to run this process, and here it is. And I've shared it with them, and in detail. Here is what I'm going to do. Here's what the outcomes are going to be. Here's the check-in points along the way. There's usually a board meeting in there somewhere, but after this 100-day, there'll be another board meeting, and here's what I'm going to present to you at that point. But I think getting in and making sure they give you the room to do that, and interference in the right word, but you know you're at that point, like I said, you're now really learning what's happening, and you're learning the EQ side of the business, right? You're understanding the culture, you're understanding the capacity and capabilities of your team. You're really understanding your organization and how do they make decisions, how are they getting information to make decisions, right? I mean, how are we managing and really measuring performance in the real world, right? Not what you heard, during the interview process, but man, what's happening at the street level, and how's that sales guy making a call on pricing? How's that operating? That warehouse guy making choices? How's the driver making choices? And getting down to that level of detail to really understand the EQ side of things, because at that point, you really now are able to bring both sides together, right? Because you'll understand how big of a challenge you have on your hands, because if the EQ side is missing from the culture standpoint, from your leadership team's capacity to drive and manage change, how you're going to set up the expectations for the pace of change with the business, because that is so critical, as well as that a lot of times when you're talking about the IQ side of the business, it is obvious the things that need to be done. But the problem is, without that capacity and capability to drive change, the pace of change, it's the how fast you can drive that change really is important. So, I think getting in and doing that and having those conversations along the way with the PE guys is so important. And then really saying, hey, how are they really operating? Again, that push and pull. I mean, is it really, they tell you it's there for the pull, but they're really pushing. And what I have seen, and I've had this multiple times in my career, is, again, they say they're pull, but they really want to push. And how you handle that conversation is very critical, because you want to make sure you're always open to suggestion. You want to make sure you're open to their ideas. And if you are not going to take that suggestion, especially early on, right, especially in that first 180 days, until that plan is cemented and everybody agrees on what's going on, you have to be very careful around why you're saying no. And my advice is to say no, because you're not going to get to where you want to. They think throwing resources at issues helps you speed them up, but that they can actually slow you down. And so, but making sure you're doing that in a very respectful way is very, very important, because you don't want to start breaking down the credibility you built up through the process. You're still in the honeymoon phase. You're still in filling things out. you've got to find some early wins. And again, whether those are organizational wins or some, commercial wins or operations wins, you got to be identifying those and saying, hey, here's what's coming, but let me really understand how we want to build the priorities out to understand the biggest impact. And I'm just not going to have that until we get to
Mhm.
the end of this process. But I think that's a very critical piece of setting yourself up for success for the long run there.
Yeah, and to me, one of the trickiest variables is how good of an executive are you to where you have the, ability and or right to try to set up some boundaries.
Yeah.
My analogy is that private equity is like water. It will flow through gravitational pull into wherever vacuum is created. And so as a management team, if you have an inspired confidence that you have occupied your domain fully, yeah, then maybe that water will lap up gently around you. But if you've demonstrated, an inability in certain areas, the water's going to come rushing in, and as it should. And so you got to somehow self-assess on, okay, here are the 10 things I need to be great at to win at this business. These five, are probably wheelhouse items for me. Maybe I'll be a little bit more stubborn's the wrong word, but
Right.
confident, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And on these other five, I'll seek varying levels of counsel, not just accept it. But that requires self-esteem, intellectual honesty, business acumen, and a private equity perspective that sometimes just comes with time. So that's a tricky thing for sure.
Yeah, because I think it's the word I would use is once you're in the chair, you have to be humble, right? And I think that's where you're accepting, that part around there's 10 things you got to do. I'm good at five, not good at the other five. Is that humility to say, hey, yeah, absolutely. Let's come in. I need your help here. I need some expertise here. I need some outside help. And again, whatever form that takes, it's there, but it's very controlled. So I think that the humility piece of it and the self-awareness piece of it is so critical, especially if you're a first-time CEO. You're a first-time CEO in the chair with a private equity company. I don't care what your background is and how prepared you think you are, you're not ready. And again, not that you're ever ready for that, but it is that water analogy is right, because it is a waterfall falling on top of you, at first, because the pace and the expectations of what you're doing, from them is so, it just, I guess the way I think about it is, playing college football, being a former athlete, the first play I ever went in, I can remember like it was yesterday. We were pinned inside where my feet were in our own goal line, went up the lineup. Shit, I forgot what the play was. I was like, oh my God, this is the first play in the game. It was so fast. That first snap was so fast. I mean, it was a blur to me. I mean, people were
Mhm.
moving so fast, things were happening. But by the time I got to be, 30 game starter, right? I mean, things really slowed down, right? I mean, I could just tell by the way the guy lined up. I was taking in all this information. I was able to know what was going to happen on the play based on my film study, all these different things. So the game, it was the same game, same type play, same everything, but the game slowed down. And so now, the PE game, the CEO role has slowed down for me because of my experience. When you're first in there, it's like going from high school to the NFL, right? I mean, the pace of the game is so different when
Mhm.
you're in the chair, and nothing prepares you for that, the speed of the game. But what can prepare you for that is making sure you have your playbook, starting to frame out, and then you'll learn how to build the rest of the rest of the pillars pretty quickly.
Mhm.
But that's just something that you just have to mentally get ready for.
That resonates big time. Every executive I've ever dealt with, and specifically first-time private equity people, boldly claim their sense of urgency is extreme and how fast they move. And then they get into this private equity deal, and it's like, wait a minute, this is the Autobahn. There's no speed limit. I got some tire tracks over my back here, and I need to like find another gear. And then, so segueing from that into this last topic for today, you mentioned the pace of change. So private equity, for those that may not know, really wants to transform their businesses. It's not about incremental growth or continuous improvement. It's about, at some level, making that company a little bit unrecognizable 4 or 5 years after they've owned it because so much happened. So there's two ways to get this wrong, as far as I know, on the pace of change. Either you're too thoughtful and too slow and you just can't execute fast enough, or you're a wonderkind and you go so fast that your team hasn't been brought along with you and you lose their confidence and you're toast. So any advice on how to think through pace of change to make sure you're in sync with your sponsor and your own capabilities?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think again, it comes down, and this is why I think the first 100 days is so critical in the PE CEO relationship, because during that first 100 days, the one thing you're going to come in and is and I tell my guys, I don't have very many rules when I come in as a CEO, right? I really, my number one rule is when the door's shut, I expect vicious debate, right? When the door opens, I expect ferocious, alignment, right? So that we're all lined up. And so going through and making sure you've gone, top to bottom, bottom to top, you understand all the data, all the information, and really have critically assessed, hey, what are our key priorities? And saying, whether that's I need to change pricing, I need to improve my operational performance, I need to upgrade my people, whatever, whatever those, 2 or 3, 4, your list. Because usually when I come out of 100 days, I'll have a list of anywhere from 10 to 20 initiatives that have to get done. And then, of course, we've gone, the leadership team, it's not my list, it's not the PE's list, but the leadership team has gone through and prioritized those based on, what's the size of the prize if we get it done? Hey, what's the, is there order of operation? If you got number 20 on the list and you can't do number one unless you do 20 first, how do you make sure you prioritize it based on that? And then do we have the capacity and capability to get things done? And usually what that entails is you pick 2 or 3 really big things that, when you knock down that hurdle, a lot of people jump over it. And so one, the leadership team is lined up of, hey, here's our list of, we're going to get these 20 things done over the next 3 to 5 years. Here's the 2 or 3 we're going to go get done first. And, and here's what we believe the size of the prize is. Then
Mm-hmm.
you bring in the private equity company and get that alignment around those things, right? And so that you're then saying, we're all aligned. Here's the reasons why, and it's really that, as part of change management, first you got to create awareness. Here's the problem. Here's the situation we're dealing with. Then, hey, if we fix it, here's the prize. So that gives you the desire, right, to get there. And then how do you get the knowledge to change, right? And I think as long as everybody is lined up with awareness, desire, and knowledge, and we're saying here's where we're going to go, then I think what that does is that kind of governs, for lack of a better term, around the expectations around what you are going to be changing, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
and you show them the list of the 20, right? The 10 to 20, you say, hey, here is the full list. But man, here's why we're doing it, and then how we're going to go attack that. And then at that point, that's where you can say, if you do have a private equity shop, and again, my first CEO role, we had a operating partner that was awesome at Lean Six Sigma. Man, he was an operational excellence guy. Then you say, hey, with this operational deal, let me pull in that OpEx expert, and man, he would be great to be a coach for this team and help move them along and make improvement. And then let me tell you what, when you get that kind of marriage, then you've got really great alignment. And then it's around, we're going to report out on the progress. And then, because we've got the KPIs identified, that will improve if we're making progress here. And then you get into the right rhythm with the board and with the private equity guys of saying, hey, here's what you can expect, here's what's happening, and why it's happening, and then here's the results of that.
Mhm.
Then you have room to operate. Then you've given yourself room to operate. If you don't have conviction to those two or three things and show them you have a list of 20, because showing them a list of 10 to 20 is important as well. They want to make
Mhm.
sure you've identified plenty of opportunity. But, I think to me, that's always given me and my team the room to operate and get things done and be successful, because that's really at the end of the day what it's all about.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, no matter how much private equity wants to be involved, I think all of them would love to have a fully competent management team driving the bus as long as they get to keep one hand on the wheel. I guess last follow-up question. So, for those that don't know, Bob alluded to this earlier, but private equity's got their own designs on 100-day plans, whether that is they are the first institutional capital into a deal and things need to be rapidly professionalized, or if it's a secondary buyout where they need to get some initiatives accomplished and questions answered, or mid-hold period, new CEO hire. Okay, why would that be? Either a founder's going to the board because it's not working out, or performance is suffering, and someone needs to come in and redirect the momentum. So I guess what I'm getting at is, how have you been able to get alignment on the 100-day plan itself? So yeah, you got your full approach. It's well documented and proven, but they have their own ideas on the first 100 days. So, how do you make sure you're accommodating their needs without it, kind of watering down your excellent approach?
Yeah, well, and I think this goes back to where we started, which was getting during the courtship process, is that, I always ask this one question, which is, hey, what does success look like at the 6 month mark and the 12 month mark? Right. And that will give you pretty good insight into what their expectation is in that first 100 and 180 days. And then I think you've got to be able to play that back to them when you're in the chair and saying, okay, we are all lined up on, what I heard during the interview process and coming on, that, hey, here at 6 months, here's what good looks like. And then here's how I'm going to get us to good. And then, just dealing with, if you, again, ask enough questions and set the expectations right, but because it is expectation setting of, again, how you give yourself the room to operate and go do what you need to go do in order to get this thing set up for the turn, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It's all about the turn.
It's all about the turn.
It's all about the turn. That's all. At the end of the day, that's all anybody cares about is, what's the money on money going to be at the turn, and what time frame. But again, getting that alignment, then that makes that first 100 days easier as they start to run their 100-day playbook. And again, you bring up an excellent point around whether, are you I always break it down into, are you the PE guy that's the aggregator, right? You're just up there grabbing assets and putting them together and, packaging them up. Are you the second kind of tier guys who are coming in and saying, okay, now I got this package of assets. I want to continue to grow that, but I need to build a platform. I need to professionalize it. I need to, get things so that it can operate for the long term. Because a lot of times founders, when they come out, is the business has got too big for them because
Hmm.
they don't have the, people, processes, and systems to operate a large scale deal. Where this, and again, to me, where that separation happens is when decisions can't just be made at the top. They got to be made throughout the organization to be successful. Usually that's when a founder has to come out of the business because they want to control everything, right? It drives them
Hmm.
crazy not to control everything. And then really the third phase is, man, now you got the size, you got the scale, and now I need more equity in here to go do the big transformational M&A, right? And so just depending on which phase of that you're in, and understanding that's really the game, depending on whether you're a small, medium, or large, PE guy who you're dealing with
Hmm.
there, I think will really kind of, help set that stage around, how you approach it and get things moving from that point forward.
No doubt. And boy, of everything you said, the thing that really hit home was asking that question of what does success look like at the 6 month mark and 12-month mark. It may seem self-evident, but what I've seen, because we asked a similar question, when we're doing intake before kicking off a search, and our favorite and best private equity clients have crisp, well thought out, preconceived answers to those questions. But others, sometimes it's more of a sort of in the moment, they're crafting the answer, no play on your last name, and you sort of wonder, okay, what do you really even know what you need out of this new hire, which, is telling in and of itself.
Because to your point, that's when you know you're going to get the tidal wave, right?
Mhm.
If they really don't have that answer figured out and they're not clear on it, that means whether you're dealing with a 12-person firm or 1,000-person firm, resources that way, man, everybody in that firm is going to be coming at it to try to add value, because I think that's the other piece. One other piece of, insight that I always had is that, the associates and the junior guys, right? They're all trying to get to the director level. They want to get to the VP level. They want to get to the upper chair. And so, when you got those younger guys coming in, again, they're smart, talented, can do a lot of great things. How you actually kind of, not turn the tables in the right word, but how you pull them alongside you and say, man, I understand you need to get wins and I want to help you get wins. But in order to do that, here's how you got to help me. Right.
Hmm.
And work within our framework, work within our priorities. And again, the example I gave earlier, the reason we were successful at that deal is because the OpEx person he had goals to get, he had initiatives to get. And I told him, here's the thing I'm going to promise you. You help drive this initiative. I'm keeping you in the loop on everything else that's going on, right? There will be no surprises for you when I talk to anybody higher, at the firm, to the partners and to the lead guys on the deal. So you're going to be fully informed. Here's the role I need you to play. And man, if you do that, we're going to be successful. You'll be successful. The group will be successful. We'll get a great outcome. But that's how you manage those kind of operating partners as they come in and say, look at what I did.
Hmm.
And you really need to say, hey, here's how you can help me do that. And it helps you. And to get that mutual working relationship so that you're working with each other. I always say, and I always coach my teams on this, is that you got to be able to come alongside people, not come at people. Because as soon as you come out somebody, the defenses go up. And that's where I think the most successful CEOs are able to use those resources and pull them alongside versus coming at you. So for what that's
Yeah,
worth.
no doubt. And I think I'm going to make this guess, the less granularity a fund has about an asset during the interview process, be it because the founder has been, less capable of professionalizing, or the CEO who's being upgraded has been less competent about it. That's going to be directly related to how voraciously they are going to want to use you as the new source of truth. And now here come all these inbound inquiries that, if you're not careful, can push too much, I'll call it non-value creation oriented work onto your plate, answering their questions at the expense of your operating initiatives. Coming back to your advice on, just be honest with them. Like, well, I know you want to know this business. I know you want to get your wins. I want you to get everything you need, but I need your help. So that constant reminder to them that it's a partnership, and you're invested in it to get them what they want, but maybe a little quid pro quo.
Yeah, and that's interesting insight you have there. Founders get away with not sharing information because they've been successful. They've been growing the business. They've been rolling it up. They've been helping execute on the M&A. But when they finally get a professional operator in who breaks down the data and gets the
Hmm.
KPIs established and gives them dashboards and all the different views they want, it's like, the old Eddie Murphy joke. If his guy starving to death, you throw him a saltine, he thinks it's the Ritz, right? But then after a while, he realizes he's eating saltines. Private equity guys the same way. The more information you give them, the more information they want. And the fine line there is, I'm going to give you the information that's lined up with our strategies, but I'm not going to give you the things that are non-value added time that we don't use to manage the business. So you're more than welcome to any KPI that we have that we use in operating the business. Happy to chart it, happy to graph it, happy to do whatever you want with it. But don't come to me and ask for these information just because you're curious, right? They're curious guys, they're smart guys, and they want to understand some of the relationships down there. But you're exactly right. You can send your team down a lot of rabbit holes that are one-time science experiments that they're just curious about, but it's not going to help you drive the business. So making sure you have that alignment around, here's the KPIs that we're managing to and helping us drive the business. Happy to spend all the time you want on those. But these other ones, hey, if we have time, we'll get to them, because you don't want the science experiment taking you away, because 2 weeks, 1 week, 5 days, 2 days, it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
You're working within a 4 to 7 year time frame, most likely more 4 to 5. So losing a half a month means something to you. So if you're going to get to your goal to get them to their goal, you can't spend time doing those things because you're just making it harder on yourself.
Yeah, and ironically, the more accommodative you are, possibly the further you're going to accelerate that flywheel of those requests. So figuring out with your sponsor in partnership, what are the things that are strategic imperatives that when you have data requests, you say jump, we'll say how high, we'll get you what you need, when you need it, as much as you need of it, versus the curiosity or the one-time science experiment, as you pointed out.
Absolutely.
Okay, my only regret is we don't have 4 hours because there's no limit to what we could cover here. Bob, thank you so much for joining today. And if you had fun, maybe we can do it again in another year. There's so much about what you've experienced that can help our members. And for those out there in the audience, shaping the way private equity governs is something we can all do together. Best way to do that is go to privateequitycxo.com, take our top 50 survey, and give your honest feedback. You love to fund? Let's hear about it. You had challenges with one? Let's hear about that too, so that we can help everybody understand what good looks like when it comes to alignment. So Bob, thank you. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you.